Good afternoon. I'm Noelle Cottaspati.
And I'm Margaret Ressi-Milkent of the Jacobson Group.
As co-champions for Dive In here in the Americas, along with Dave Bishop from Willis Towers Watson, we would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you joining us for Dive In Hartford. Celebrating 5 years here in the Americas, Dive In is the global festival for diversity, inclusion, and equity across the insurance industry. This week, you are joining more than 20,000 industry colleagues around the world that have registered for Dive In events in more than 30 countries.
We'd like to thank all of our global and local sponsors, our partners, and our over 500 volunteers. You made today happen. Virtual Dive In 2020. A special thanks to the Hartford team, especially Tisa Rabin, Marshall, Leanne Cornell, and Carrie Brodzinski. You are amazing. Thank you for your leadership, your heart, and your commitment to DEI. Now, on to the Dive In show.
Good afternoon. My name is Tisa Rabin Marshall, and I'm a marketing professional at Nassau Financial Group. Echoing the comments that you just heard, I'm really excited to welcome you all here today on behalf of our city chairperson, Carrie Brodzinski, my fellow planning committee members of the Hartford Dive In Planning Committee, of course our global partners and our local company sponsors, AXA XL, Aspen Re, and Nassau. This is the second year we've partnered to bring together our Hartford area industry professionals for Dive In and the discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, going virtual means that we are most likely welcoming you from all over, not just the Hartford, greater Hartford region, but the country and the globe today, which is awesome. We have a really dynamic panel to help us challenge the status quo and hopefully form some real tangible action items to change the future of representation and the diverseness within our industry. We'll be our panel will be introduced in just a moment by our moderator for today, and she will be leading us through discussion and Q&A. But before that happens, I first have the honor of introducing her. So with that, please help me welcome Ngazi Inaji. Ngazi has over 20 years in the insurance industry and an extensive background in both the corporate and now entrepreneurial sectors. She is managing partner of ACO Brokerage Services, LLC, and the founder of ACO Insurance Consulting. In her spare time, however she finds the time, she's also an adjunct professor at Goodwin University in the Business Administration Department. She really is a recognized leader in our community and in our industry. She's currently serving as the inaugural president of the Greater Hartford chapter of the National African American Insurance Association, also known as NAIA, and she was recently elected to the NAIA National Board. In addition to that, she serves on the board and is a volunteer with Junior Achievement of Southwest New England. So we are so very grateful to welcome her here today. I'm grateful to her for offering her time and talent to lead us through this very important discussion. And I will turn it over to you, Ngazi.
Thank you, Tisa. Thank you for that introduction. It is a pleasure to be here. I am pleased to be moderating this panel, The Future of Inclusion and Diversity in the Insurance Industry. This panel will take a look at where the insurance industry is currently around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also provide some insight as to the insurance industry of tomorrow. Before we get into the discussion, let's review the stats. Now, for those who don't know, Tisa didn't say I'm an actuary by trade, so numbers are always important. So, with that being said, in 2017, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that African Americans made up only 12.6% of the insurance industry, with a little movement since that time. In 2016, the Agency Universe study stated that 90% of agency principals and senior managers were white, leaving only 10% to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, or minorities. Also, 69% of students surveyed as part of RippleMatches.com Gen Z Job Seeker Report said that a diverse executive leadership team demonstrates to them a commitment to equality. And if the business case around diversity wasn't clear enough, even before the death of George Floyd, companies with the most ethnical and cultural diverse boards worldwide are 43% more likely to experience higher profits based on the 2018 McKinsey & Company Delivering Through Diversity report. Now those are the numbers. So here with me today to talk about those stats and much more are our panelists. First, we have Commissioner Andrew Mays. Commissioner Mays is Connecticut's 33rd Insurance Commissioner. He also serves on the Executive Committee for the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Not only is he committed to public service in his role as commissioner, but also in his spare time. Welcome, Commissioner Mays. Nancy Boulay is the Global Chief Underwriter for AXA XL. Nancy is responsible for AXA XL's underwriting, governance, pricing, and P&L globally. Thank you for joining us, Nancy. And finally, we have Commissioner Gary Anderson. Commissioner Anderson is the Massachusetts Commissioner of Insurance. He had started his career experience in 1991, so a long time tenure in the insurance industry, and has served in many capacities since his entrance. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for joining us today on the third day of the Global Dive-In Festival. May I have you appear on screen with me, please? Welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Ngazi.
Thank you. Once I figure out how to work the mute button.
It's all good. It's all good. We see you. We hear you now. Let's get started. Let's talk a little bit. Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Mays, Nancy, I'm sure those stats were not surprising to you at all. The numbers I referenced predate the racial injustice that we've experienced as a society earlier this year. With that in mind, I ask you first, Commissioner Mays, what are your thoughts about our industry as a result of those events, not forgetting COVID has played a part too around D&I?
Let's not just talk about our industry, because it goes beyond that. What happens in our industry reflects what happens in the broader society, and we have to first accept that, and if we need to be able to address it. You know, I was listening to NPR the other day, and there is a country song, believe it or not, by Mickey Guyton. She is a black woman, I think, in her 30s. And the chorus struck me. It's a hard life, uneasy street, just white painted picket fence as far as you can see. If you think we live in the land of the free, you should try to be black like me. I think that speaks to the very different experiences that many of us face, both in the industry and in general. You know, I think if you talk to any person of color of a certain age, they've got lots of experiences that they can share with you, experiences with various degrees of pain, you know, ranging from whatever you ran into with the police to just the daily microaggressions, you know. And as I was sitting here a couple of days ago thinking about this week, and I was thinking, you know, again, that song, I kept playing it on repeat. And she was saying she's all grown up and nothing has changed. It's still the same. Oh, I know I'm not the only one who feels like I don't belong. And I think we've all felt that. We've all felt as if we were the only one, felt uncomfortable in the room. And that has to change. And I hope it's a measured hope, because if you just look at what happened this week, this is not something that goes back to the 1865 or 1960. Just this week, we have the federal government saying that sensitivity trainings, racial sensitivity trainings that address topics like white privilege and race theory should not happen. And, people that have contracts with the federal government shouldn't be able to do that. Just this week, a couple of days ago, or 2-3 days ago, I think it was, a CEO of a major bank blamed his bank's lack of diversity on a shortage of black talent. Now, I guess it's ironic in a certain sense. The HuffPost reported this is the same bank that just paid almost $8 million just in August over claims that it had discriminated against more than 34,000 black applicants in hiring. But this is what we hear, this is what we know happens, and this is why we know that we are underrepresented in this industry as well as at the higher level of society. Now, I can tell you my own personal experience. I had a mentor, a very high-level person, board of directors member, who once told me that if I really wanted to be successful, commensurate with my talent, I should get out of financial services, that this was not the place for me. And I think that's a message that's been shared with too many people. But I'm also here today because, Citigroup just released a report, and it said that the U.S. economy lost $16 trillion over the past 20 years as a result of discrimination against African Americans. Now, that doesn't include what happened with Latinos and many other groups. It's $16 trillion over the past 20 years, and we've got the GDP of the economy is actually slightly under $20 billion a year, so you can see the size of that. And they say if we address this, according to Citigroup, the economy could gain another $5 trillion over the next 5 years. So it's not just a moral question for me, it's an economic question. We have to have an industry that is able to reach everyone, all customers, provide the products that we need, because I happen to think insurance is an incredibly important industry, both for individuals and for society as a whole. It is it's a positive industry. It adds so much. It is a social good, and we need to make sure it reaches everyone. And I'll tell you, too, why I'm here, why I'm in insurance, because this is not where I started, and like most people, it's probably not where they started. But I had a friend, and I live in Wilton, Connecticut, and I had a friend who was a police chief there who moved back to New York and became I think he was the Inspector General for the New York State Insurance Department. And he was the one that convinced me to give insurance a try. The person who hired me was a good friend of mine now, Republican, of all things. I'm a Democrat, by the way. It's a Republican, white Republican. He hired me. He gave me my start in insurance at the department, and incidentally, he was the one that recruited me repeatedly for my previous position. So as I pointed out to him, he keeps making the same mistake. I'm here because we have a NAIC president, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. We've got a white president who said, let us not do the easy thing in the wake of George Floyd and so many others. Let us do the hard thing. Let us look at race in the industry and let us see what we can do. And we have 56 chief regulators, a diverse group, who said, this is something we can do, and more importantly, this is something we need to do. I'm here because I have a governor, Governor Lamont, and Lieutenant Governor Weislitz in the state, and the great state of Connecticut. I am the 33rd, as you mentioned, 33rd commissioner and the first black commissioner, black insurance commissioner. You know what? When Governor Lamont and Lieutenant Governor Weislitz were elected, what they did, they didn't say there was a lack of talent anywhere across the cabinet. What they did was they formed task forces, they formed search groups, and they said, go out, find the best people, and let's make sure we reflect the state we live in. Tone at the top really matters, and I think that's, it's reflected, clearly reflected in our cabinet here in Connecticut, which is the most diverse cabinet ever. And yes, I'm here for Congressman Lewis. Congressman Lewis said he wasn't a militant, so, but everything he did in the 60s, he did for love of the country and love of the people who live here. And that's kind of the way I feel about the country, the state, and the people about insurance. I love this industry. I love the people in this industry, and I want to make sure that this industry is the best it can be. And I guess one little item that I noticed a couple of weeks ago, as I'm sure everyone in the industry knows, we have supervisory colleges and annual meetings with various insurers. We've got some pretty big insurers here in Connecticut. A couple of weeks ago, we had one with an extremely large insurer. And these things can go on forever, and you can kind of, everybody's silo may not be the right word, but everybody covers their area. But it begins, or it usually begins, and this one began that way, with a presentation and discussion from the CEO of the parent company, who wanted to lay out for us what the vision he had for the company, where everything was going in this time of change. And one of the things he did, he had a deck, part of the deck was devoted to diversity and inclusion. And not just diversity, because that's where, but inclusion, making sure everybody has a voice, everybody could be their authentic selves. And I have to tell you, looking at this company, I couldn't tell him then, but looking at the company, it's a company that's done a pretty good job. But he wasn't satisfied. And yes, he was white too. But he wanted to do better. He wanted to make sure that what they did was they put the policies and the processes in place, as well as the metrics, to make sure this is not a passing fancy. And that's what I think we need to do for the industry. That's why I'm here. We've got a moment, and we can use it to make a movement. Because until everyone is able to get jobs in the industry, understands that they feel welcome in this industry, and can get the products that they need from this industry will not have fulfilled, it will not be its best self. And I want us all to be our best selves.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Mays. Definitely agree with you on the tail end of your comments. But I want to kind of turn the conversation to Nancy a little bit, because I think, as we look back over, the events, the unfortunate death of George Floyd, kind of the BLM movement, and I mentioned COVID because I think that takes a part in this, right? We're all kind of sitting at home, kind of watching what's happening externally. I mean, do you think those events created more awareness? Or, kind of what was the impact, I think, on our industry around the need to do more than we have done around diversity? Just get your thoughts about that.
I'd love to share them. As a company, we've been focused on inclusion and diversity, but the events of the world actually woke us up a little bit. I'm on the leadership team of AXA-XL, and if we gave ourselves marks before, we thought we were doing okay. But what we have determined as a leadership team is that, we have to create a space to touch the untouchable topics and actually put it on the table and put it at the leadership table to drive our change as an organization, to be able to be accountable at the top, have a strategy like we have every other business strategy to drive change through us as an example for the outside. And so a couple different things. We saw what was happening, and we wanted to enable our business resource groups and created our PRIDE, which a lot of people know about the PRIDE group, Rise for Racial Equity, and Enable for Disability, because we have to go beyond just gender diversity. And so we said it from a leadership perspective. These are what our employees want from us, so we need to join it. We need to join the resource groups and enable them, and then take those topics to how we run the organization. We determine, based upon the events of the world and how it impacted us as a community inside our organization and impacted us in the community we're trying to serve, that we have to have a strategic plan for both for racial and ethnic equity, and to have a stated plan of how we set our leadership, what our leadership looks like. We're changing how we think about, everyone talks about a diverse panel. Well, what does that really mean, and are we diverse enough when we have a diverse panel for hiring? So we're changing our practices there. And we're looking at how do we educate AccessXL, how do we educate our leaders, how do we change what it means to be a leader within AccessXL, and we're putting a lot of those topics, we call them the untouchable topics, out in the open. They're uncomfortable, but if you don't talk about them and if you don't give them a voice, then you just actually never take the hard commitment and to do anything about it. And I want to say that, you know, in COVID world, it has been a silver lining that we are able to connect really diversely throughout our organization, and something that we saw, which until you look in the mirror, you don't know it. COVID has allowed us to really have diverse teams when we tackle issues, because some of the things that block our ability to make sure that we represent our entire AccessXL community are expenses and flying people around, and when we don't have that now. Now you can actually say, all right, if we do it well, we can get people from all over the world. So I feel we're in a critical point of change, and that our employees, we're giving them the voice to hold us accountable and listen to what they need. And so I'll pause. I said a lot there, and I know through this conversation we can probably unpick a little bit more of that.
Most definitely, most definitely. But I want to turn it over to Commissioner Anderson. And so definitely Nancy talked about definitely things that ACTA is doing within their organization to move change forward. Commissioner Mays talked about, you know, the company that came before him and his team and talked about their diversity efforts. You know, my question to you is that, you know, Nancy said accountability, which is key, right? Key in this process. So what do you think regulators could do to kind of help hold insurance companies, particularly around this accountability around diversity? Is there an opportunity to kind of create an environment where that, you know, it becomes kind of second nature? Because we know right now that not every company is making those efforts. So how do we establish that accountability, and where do you think the you know, your role as commissioner and your role as within the DOI is around that?
Yeah, thanks, Ngozi, and happy to discuss that. And thank you for the invite. Happy to be here, and Andy, with Nancy and Andy. Andy, I'm happy that you listened and chose to stay in the financial services sector. You know, it seems like I'm always given the task of following Commissioner Mays, and so his gravitas is something that I'm not going to be able to keep up with. But you know, we've traveled over the last couple of years together because of our assignments through the NAIC on international matters, and I've really had, I've felt really fortunate to get to know Andy and to become a friend of Andy's. And I, you know, and on this particular issue, it's been a, I think, really, really interesting to listen to Andy's take and his life experiences. And it does remind me, as to your question, Ngazi, about what the industry is going to do, what are we as regulators going to do? You know, as a commissioner at this point in history, what is it incumbent upon me to do? And as many know, we stood up a special committee on race and insurance through the NAIC, and Andy alluded to this through the leadership of Ray Farmer, the director from South Carolina. And this was set up over the summer, and during one of our first conversations that we had among the regulators, just the regulators, it was one of our officers, Director Cameron from Idaho, said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you know, I'm a white guy from Idaho, so I'm not going to profess to understand everything and won't necessarily have the answers. There was a discussion kind of post-call, and Andy and I agreed that the sentiment resonated. And I think his genuine demeanor helped to express that sentiment. He used words that captured what a number of us others felt. We don't know what we don't know. We're going to have blind spots. But as Andy and I talked about, this is a journey that we're all going to be on. And, you know, you mentioned I started in insurance a number of years ago in the late 90s, and like probably many people, like Andy said, it kind of happened to me. I wasn't seeking out insurance, but it's interesting because when you're in it, you feel like you have all of this exciting knowledge and it's very specialized and you're part of this club. And now I think we have the opportunity, as Andy said, to expand it, to make it inclusive. So I am really excited about that opportunity. And Andy, I think, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I may be the 33rd commissioner in Massachusetts as well. As a interesting way. So anyway, Ngozi, I think through that committee, and we'll discuss more about that. There'll be a few themes, and I'm happy to talk about kind of what we can potentially do through that committee and the engagement that we'll have through stakeholders through that committee, and what that means, right? Because there are some questions I think we need to address. Is there really, you know, is the industry itself, the sector, really committed to the change? So happy to kind of address those as we move through the conversation too.
Most definitely. And so if you guys don't mind, I want to pivot a little bit because we have a question coming from the audience that I think can talk to some of the comments or discussion points that we had when we did our prep that Nancy brought up. But Vanessa Borrero, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, kind of generally asked, what can we do as an industry to help increase access and quality of services to the transgender community? There's more to that, but I do want to say thank you, Vanessa, for mentioning the transgender community. I have a transgender daughter, so that's very close to home to me. But, you know, she goes on to ask, is there a way that we can influence insurance companies to better address their needs? Can we design specialized benefits for them? I want to kind of broaden that because, again, she's talking about a very unique and underrepresented group, right, as we talk about diversity, but across the board, because I think, Nancy, when we had our prep, you talked about kind of, you know, how do we start to take our pricing models and our risk models and how do we start to create products and services, and even Commissioner Mays mentioned it in his intro. So, you know, maybe, Nancy, if you could kind of take a stab at kind of answering kind of how can we respond better to the needs of those underrepresented communities that need unique products and services based on the differences that they have.
Great, thank you for that question. That's a great question. And first, I want to say I am the co-chair of our Pride organization, so it's something that I'm committed to. And how do you start to address the needs? It's both internally and externally. And I'll start with the internal perspective as first, is that making it an environment when we all hear bring your whole self to work, right? You have to bring your whole self to work. You have to be who you are, and you have to be in a culture and a climate that allows you to be that. If we are going to be an industry that services our entire global community, we have to service everybody. We have to challenge ourselves to be able to get that full representation. And when I specifically, you think about the transgender people, it is difficult because they're a minority, right? And you see things that occur in regards to insurance coverage or medical coverage, and you hear these terrible stories of somebody having to justify why they should be treated as the gender that they identify with. So I think that when you put these things on the table as a very strategic business plan to be able to service our entire community, first you invite them in to be part of that creation of that product, right, to make sure that they're part of insurance and the insurance industry. And only with that can you actually then be sensitive enough to be able to provide, as I said, products for the entire community. But in my role, I'm responsible for underwriting and actuarial, and we're really excited as an industry. We talk a lot about data and analytics and how can we be very future forward, how can we use AI, how can we create models. The worry that I have, and don't have an answer for, the worry that I have is that if you study data, if you study models, they have a potential to be biased, and that's a worry. So are we creating biased models that actually are exclusionary? Because oftentimes you're looking at your past and trying to tie that to your future. So while I don't have an answer to that, I think that there needs to be scrutiny in regards to the models that are being created to help insurance companies select and price business. And that is something that I expect a conversation at a regulator's office perspective in the Department of Insurance. As we file our plans, making sure that they're consumer friendly and they represent fairly all different types of people. So,
If I could, sorry.
no, please go ahead.
I was
going
too long
on this
Commissioner.
one.
No, I knew
No,
Commissioner Mays was ready for this one. I knew he was
Yeah.
ready for this one.
Yeah.
So please.
I want to respond on two levels there. One has to do with what you said about having the people at the table when you're designing the products. And that's why it is so important to have a diverse talent pool at an organization that has a safe space to be their authentic selves. Yeah, it's I'm going to go back a little bit to that bank CEO who said that there just wasn't enough black talent for them to diversify their management ranks. Turns out, according to one news story, this guy got into the business because a family friend gave his name to a senior banker who is now a very top banker. And that was the same banker who recommended him for his current position as a CEO. And this is what happens. But if you're only talking to people at the country club, if you're only talking to people in a particular stratum of society, you are only going to be able to understand the concerns they have. You are not going to be able to address the broader issues. If you don't have people there who are black or brown, who are female, who are transgender, who are gay, you will lose those perspectives and you will lose the ability to address those markets. So I think it's very important what Nancy said. We need that broad talent pool, and insurers have to do everything they can. I mean, we can't tolerate the easy answers anymore. We can't tolerate the inaction. We can't tolerate hearing that, there's just nobody in the talent pool. It's simply not true. It just means that you're not looking hard enough. Now, the flip side, not the flip side, but related to that is the whole idea of artificial intelligence. And for many of us, artificial intelligence is both a potentially positive, very positive statement and could have a positive impact on the industry. And it also brings concerns. And I'll repeat the same thing that I do pretty much at every speech in artificial intelligence because it's easy. And I've been an Amazon customer since they were just a bookstore, an online bookstore. And I'm sure most people have heard that what happened with Amazon, they were trying to get network engineers and they used AI. They had a machine learning tool to pick their engineers. And somebody noticed somewhere in there that all the engineers that were being picked were male. And the reason for that is when they did the success matrix, all the engineers at Amazon, all the network engineers were male. So of course you were going to look at somebody male because that you were going to see as a signifier of success. And that's a big concern with AI. That's something that we have to ensure that artificial intelligence, given its impact, is not allowed to perpetuate the biases of the past. Commissioner Godfrey in North Dakota has done a tremendous job, and we can go into this in more detail if you'd like at some point. But the NAIC has actually come up with artificial intelligence principles that we expect the regulated entities to live by, and that will guide the way we regulate our entities. Because we know this will have an impact in every area of insurance, and we can't afford to get it wrong. So yeah, that was Nancy. I'm sorry if I cut you off, but I just couldn't resist.
Yeah,
you started touching on that. Yeah.
And Commissioner Anderson, I was going to ask you. Because I think, you talked about, again, the streamlines that NAIC has. I mean, is this part of kind of the agenda addressing on a go-forward basis, kind of the product services, how it affects the community, the underrepresented community, and as it relates to kind of some of the technologies and the modeling that goes into that?
Yeah, and maybe what I do is back up just slightly and first to address the initial question, because I think it's really critical as well, the rights of transgender people. And here in Massachusetts, we've taken a number of steps back in 2014 to protect rights and provide the services that they need. We're updating that at this very moment to make sure that despite other efforts that may be afoot to pare back some of those services, that they're receiving the services that they need. So I do think it's important to note that, and I'm proud that we're often leading the way on issues like that here in the Commonwealth. And you referenced the McKinsey report, Ngazi, earlier, and then Andy kind of weaved his narrative kind of into that, which is that report, which they just released, and if I recall, it's probably their third report on this type of issue of inclusion and diversity. And so I'd first say yes, as what is a society, but also as an insurance sector, we have a responsibility to address racial inequality while promoting diversity in the insurance sector. What that report did is made the business case for it. And this is, I think, what the point that Andy is getting to is that, it posits that diverse teams have shown to be more, to radically innovate, to anticipate shifts in consumer needs. So when they're doing that, right, they're helping their companies maintain a competitive advantage. I would then say to Nancy's point about the products, and this will be, Andy alluded to AI as well, and the importance and I think the real promise that AI presents for us. Andy also noted the challenges that we face as a regulator to make sure when we're harnessing the promise that we're not allowing unfair discrimination. But I think as I've thought over the last several months about how to address these issues, when we've encountered challenges in the past, we've typically set up frameworks, right? And so it made me think about some of our own residual market frameworks, one of those being home insurance. So the riots and episodes of civil unrest in the late 60s, Congress, Massachusetts legislatures across the states took steps to create statewide programs to make sure that property insurance was more readily available. And part of that goal was to revitalize urban America. So it established a framework. And today, those areas that were once struggling to find that insurance here, at least in the Commonwealth, that's not the case anymore. In a similar vein, when you look at the residual auto market that was set up here in Massachusetts because everybody has to have auto insurance, there had to be a mechanism or a framework in place to ensure that some people, for a variety of factors, were having a difficult time finding insurance in the voluntary market. So a system was set up to provide certain territories or disproportionately represented territories, and a credit system was established for credits given to those carriers that would write in certain areas. What used to be 50%, right, in the residual market, over time, because of that framework, because of that system, it's now reduced to 1.2%. I think that's a testament to the idea that you set up these frameworks, and I think that's part of the reason that we're doing what we're doing through the NAIC. As the regulators, right, the overseers of the insurance market, putting in place a framework to allow for these kinds of changes. And I appreciate, like Andy said, Director Farmer's leadership on this to set up this special committee to look at the data and potentially provide solutions, models that we can use to set up the framework, and then for companies like Nancy's to come in and create within that framework.
No, thank you for that, Commissioner Anderson. Definitely establishing that framework will be key. Now, going back to our audience here, another question that's come in, and we're going a little bit off track, but that's okay. These are good questions, and so I think it definitely kind of lends to kind of the conversation about what do we do next, right? What is the next step in our evolution as we respond to these challenges, recognizing that the insurance industry has a long way to go. So, kind of referencing these changes and opportunities to create solutions is good. And so Alyssa Johnson, and I'm going to summarize her question, talks more about, to the underwriting component, Nancy. And so granted, we're talking about risk modeling, pricing modeling, but, the biases that occur in underwriting. So she asked, kind of what are underwriters or carriers doing about that? But then also, if you take it a step further, right, when you start to recognize that there are certain, risks, certain businesses that might be profitable but do not align with the social responsibility and the values of your organization, what do you do then? So maybe it's a two-part question, I guess.
It's definitely a two-part question, and for me, the second part is easier to answer than the first part. So I'm going to start with the second part, and hopefully it will feed the first part. I'm in an organization that looks at what is my corporate social responsibility to this world and what's important to us. And so I'm in an organization, a global organization, AXA, that says climate and climate change affects everybody and really affects parts of our world that actually don't have a strong enough voice in many parts of the world. So as an organization, we have to use our energy, our resources to actually affect that change, to stop the negative impact of climate change, particularly in challenged communities. So therefore, we've taken a position on our participation in investment like in coal, and how are we going to actually change our global footprint, our carbon footprint, and to be fair, it comes through my budget and my plan. How we operate as individuals, if my teams travel, how they travel is all calculated, and I have to think about that, and I have to think about how I run my teams to lessen my impact. So that's a day-to-day, but as a company, we said we don't support these businesses that we think are ultimately hurting the world. The second thing that from an underwriting perspective, and when we think about inclusion and diversity and racial equity, we take a position that drives through the entire organization. So I think that you have to be public, you have to be out there, it has to be part of your discussion with your investors and your discussion with the market, so that we can be held up and be accountable to actually not only we say this, say what you do, what you say. And so I think we're doing a decent job of setting expectations for ourselves. And then the next challenge is how do you use that approach to actually bring products to the market? And they're risky products when they're new. And we have AXA Climate, and we've developed a parametric team that we're looking at science and using science to drive our underwriting to provide structured solutions, parametric solutions tied to climate events, to try and serve those areas of the world that will be impacted by climate events, so that we can help bring those communities back onto their feet. And we're a very large property cat company, and when we look at catastrophes around the world and where they occur, we are being mindful of trying to tie that to our climate action. So it's a little bit of both, of tying those together, because if we take a stand on who we are from that corporate social responsibility, we can't just talk about it. We actually then have to look at how those products we develop and what we put into the market and how that impacts our bottom line, either positively or negatively. When we say we won't support that industry anymore, we hold ourselves accountable.
I'm curious, Commissioner Mays, you referenced, again, the insurance executive that was stood before you and kind of talked about his D&I strategies and what he's doing internally. I mean, is that regularly part of the conversation? I mean, to Nancy's point, I mean, if a carrier takes a position on a social topic, right, is that part of the conversation when they stand before you and kind of review kind of their financial standing, what they're doing internally, their strategies? And that's just more out of curiosity for me, because I think, again, going back to the accountability conversation, is that an opportunity to kind of to draw that kind of information out of them?
It's a good question. It has not necessarily been a part of the conversation with most regulators, I would think, going as you look into history. But I do think that will change going forward. This particular company came in and they spoke to it themselves. I didn't have to ask them. I will tell you back in those long ago days before COVID, when we had, because this was an in-person, similar event, similar large company, and among the things they do is they show the changes in their leadership, because their leadership is under essentially, that's part of our purview as an insurance department. They were showing the changes in their leadership, detailing their vision, and I remember sitting there and saying, this doesn't look like the most diverse group to me. You've got these people coming in, replacing people who look exactly like them. And I was told they're working on it and they're going to send a plan, and I'm still waiting on the plan. So at some point, I'm sure they will get around to it. But the important thing is, at least for me, if we keep focus on this going forward, then it becomes harder to ignore. Then it will not just be the companies and the leadership. I'm a strong believer in the tone at the top being important, which is why I mentioned it was the CEO who did this. He didn't leave it to somebody else. He said, no, I am the CEO. This is my responsibility, and I'm going to be held accountable for this. We have companies like that. We have companies who don't necessarily think that. And we have to, as we go through going forward, I think this is part of what we will discuss during the race and insurance discussion at the NAIC. We have to hold companies accountable. We have to make sure that they are doing what they should. I'm not sure if Gary would have anything to add to that in terms of, the initiative, but that's the way I see it. We have to, what may or may not have been done in the past is one thing, but going forward, this is just like any other risk. And I see this as a risk. I mean, if you look up the streets, just like climate change or anything else, it is a risk to the company, and it is up to us as regulators to ensure that consumers are not damaged by that risk.
So, Commissioner Anderson, before you respond really quick, and I agree, Commissioner Mays, I mean, $16 trillion is a risk, right? $16 trillion has a financial impact. But, Commissioner Anderson, so I think from Commissioner Mays' comment, I think, that CEO taking that stance, taking accountability and responsibility kind of was what I am defining in the context of our conversation, a bold action, right? We haven't historically seen it before. He's recognizing the times that we're in, and he's making a stand, and he'll take responsibility for his organization on a go-forward basis. So as you continue to respond to Commissioner Mays' previous comments, also add into there, what other bold action should we expect, do we need to see from our industry to really move this along? Diversity, that is, diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ngozi. Yes. And as I thought through this and I appreciate that particular leader's leadership on the issue. That is bold. I've thought a lot about how, and I'm going to keep going back to, I guess it's going to be a bit of a theme for me, the idea of this framework, because once you've established a framework, right, you, as Andy said, you have a commitment to sustained change, right? So you're going to be constantly making adjustments, updating, creating something new. So I think that's afforded. So I don't know that these maybe what look like incremental changes are necessarily mutually exclusive to something being bold. And I think it's important. That's why we're having these discussions via the NAIC, and again, I encourage others to get engaged in that process. I think if you look at, all right, so that's from the company CEO's perspective. So what is the role of people like me and Andy? How are we going to ensure that these types of changes do indeed occur, right? Because I'm certain that there is the comment out there, well, is this the insurance industry just talking, right? Are they really going to do anything? And I do think we already have some mechanisms in place. But if you look at, and this is a little touch technical, but if you look at, for example, our financial examination handbook, right? It includes an exhibit for understanding corporate governance. A particular exhibit within it is intended to assist the examiner to document, right? things like succession planning. So it's possible that we could use the exam process to at least establish a baseline and a baseline understanding of like each company or each group and their philosophy or policies relative to inclusion and diversity. Maybe even questions about diversity itself and at levels within the company. So we've done that here in Massachusetts in the past, right? We've used that already existing mechanism, and we've incorporated questions related to IT and how do you, Company X, protect personal information, right? And what are your systems? You got to demonstrate all your systems. Are they legacy? Are they new? How they talk to each other and how you protect that information. The other, and I thought of another measure that we could use, which is the CGAD, the Corporate Governance Annual Disclosure that's filed by the companies. So instead of the 5-year exam process, maybe it's every year, because that's an annual filing, and these are not, there's enough flexibility within those filings to allow each company to, to have kind of their own submission. So I think that's another avenue for us to explore as we go through our Race and Insurance Special Committee to talk about how do we build these in, to end these points to your questions, how do we build these into the system so that it's truly taking hold?
No, thank you
just making it normal, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
making it
No,
normal.
I think
Hold me accountable for that, right? And so when you set the expectation for the industry, it becomes normal and it becomes part of what's expected, and then it loses its mystique and we just drive towards it. So I very much
Definitely.
like what you said.
Definitely, and I hope Jean Ann, one of our audience members who posed a question about kind of what are the departments of insurance doing, I hope that answered your question. I think there's some strategic things in place already, strategic things to come that will really help drive the systemic change that we're looking for. There's a lot of questions coming in. Wow. All right, so I have one for you specifically going back to Commissioner Anderson. You spoke of kind of I'm sorry, let me kind of rephrase. We'll come back to you, Christine, because I'm not quite sure I understand your question. So going back to kind of the bold actions of the industry. So, any additional thoughts, Nancy, as to what those bold actions could be? What should they look like? I mean, granted, you're coming from the insurance company side, but obviously there's a lot of disciplines and stakeholders within our industry. What could, even, our agency partners do? What could our, TPAs do from a claims perspective? There's other components where we can make bold moves towards the diversity and inclusion platform as an industry.
There are. Obviously, it takes all of us in the industry, insurance, reinsurance, like you said, TPA, brokers, all of us, to come together actually and set a standard. Set a standard of expectations that we hold each other to. Even who do we engage with? Who do we partner with and become our clients? We should be measuring. If we have an expectation on ourselves about how we are going to transform ourselves, we should hold that mirror up to them. If I speak only of the organization in which I'm in, there are two things my colleagues from XXXL will recognize. The first thing is what gets measured gets done. We say this all the time. And the second is create the plan and work the plan. This is this mantra within my organization. And we said, my goodness, we only put that towards our underwriting, our results. Now we're putting it towards inclusion, we're putting it towards diversity, we're putting it towards racial equity. And we're using this to say, I expect that my chief executive will hand me performance management measures. That will be how I'll get measured to. That I will then cascade that down to those people who report to me, that cascades down to the entire organization. And so, what gets measured gets done, and it just becomes a normal deliverable, and it's a strategic plan that we can speak to. And I know I keep saying that, but I think it's too easy that we can all talk about these great things that we're going to do, And if you don't have a plan to do it, then you can't do it. One of the things, the commitment that we've taken this is really super small, but small things add up. From an actuarial perspective, we noticed that we actually weren't reaching out to the Black Actuarial Society on a regular basis, and then said, we will bring in X amount of interns from that society so that we can start building our talent pool and putting our resources behind it. So simple actions, but they add up. And that's what I think in our industry, that has to be that dialogue that you say, what is it you're actually going to do? And and it just doesn't get done until we measure ourselves.
No, and I agree with that, Nancy. And I think, one of the questions kind of that we discussed in our prep, and that's been posed from a general panel, is a sense of, we have such a steep hill in the industry. And so I think to your point around even these little actions within your organization could be aggregated in the sense that they become that bold step, that bold action the next. So I do like those references. And just to kind of clarify, Christine, who had a question in the audience, Commissioner Anderson, she's looking for your exhibits, so maybe we can work with dive in. The exhibits that you referenced, that you spoke of earlier in your comments, we'll work with dive in to get that to you, Christine. But Commissioner Mace, so we also have a question here, kind of going to the kind of internal workings of creating a culturally competent environment within organizations. So I know this is a little off the mark from our discussion, but I think, Sonia raises a good question here. If we're talking to some degree as to companies or organizations that have created an awareness around D&I, right, who are now kind of, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, right? They're moving forward. They understand what it all means. But what about those organizations that don't, that are still kind of hiding behind whatever they're hiding behind and still think that, this is not a real thing? Any kind of comments or advice you could give to not only the employee who's kind of standing there and saying, kind of frustrated with the fact that things aren't changing, but maybe even to that employer or that organization?
I think the organization will suffer in the long run. And I think if there are shareholders in that organization, they should be well aware of that. That doesn't really help in the short run. Just to step back a little bit to look at what I've done here in Connecticut, just as I think every other regulator has sought to address it. And when I came into Connecticut and I looked around, one of the first things I did, and when I say I mean my staff that I work together, we have about a little over 200,000 licensees in the state of Connecticut. But the licensing exam was only offered in English. And we do have a sizable non-English speaking population in the state. So what we did is we went out and we got the licensing exam translated, so now it's available in Spanish. And that's a signal. Insurance largely serves, or insurance can serve to a significant effect as a signaling mechanism. And that, I'm hoping, is a kind of signal that we as regulators can send. Just as internally, for instance, Lady Mendoza is our first ever Chief Inclusion Officer. I wanted everyone to know in the department how important this is. And as regulators, if we think it's important, we're going to be looking at the companies to make sure they think it's important as well. For the person who is stuck, and I know what that's like to be in a company where the people at the top don't seem to care, where they will pay lip service, where some things are not measured, not managed, not incented, probably the best suggestion I can have is allies. We do need allies. We need a safe space. We need to be able to leverage the power that we have. And sometimes it's stunning the power that we have, even when we don't think we do. That doesn't work. Frankly, there are lots of good companies out there who want you. You don't need to be in a company where the management simply is not good enough, is not forward-thinking enough to understand the value that you bring. Not the best answer, but there are no magic wands. This is a slow process sometimes, and we got to keep fighting.
Thank you for that. So just, we're coming to the end of our panel discussion. A lot of good conversation. I think a lot of solutions that are kind of actionable in nature and kind of already in real time taking place. So with that said, with the final kind of 5 minutes that we have here in our discussion, we're going to, Commissioner Anderson, I want to start with you and kind of give final thoughts. What does our insurance community look like tomorrow? Where do you see us going, and where do you think people can make a difference and impact and move that ball forward individually?
Sure. So I actually, as I'm listening to the question, I was reminded of something I came across, and this particular commentary struck me. We've seen a lot of statements from a lot of different entities about this particular issue, and there was one. It was from the life insurance community, so it was a collection of the trades, brokers, advisors, and in that, and bear with me, I'll quote them, but it's too often the justice system has failed, bringing devastating consequences such as destroyed hope, fear, and division. And then they went on further to say, overcoming today's agonizing rupture and advancing promise for all will require engagement by each of us, a resolve to face the pain, anxiety, and frustration experienced by Black Americans and others subjected to prejudice. We must move forward with moral purpose, making contributions with our own abilities and sustained commitment. And it made me think about a line that I've seen elsewhere, which is that our system, whether it's on the regulator side, the company side, should be a reflection of the society, right? That the industry aims to protect. And I do feel very fortunate. In our prep session in Gaza, we talked about the word collaborate, and I do think that is a very key word in all of this. Each, as they said somewhere in there, each to our own abilities, right? On how each of us can contribute. I work in a state where I'm very fortunate to work for a governor that believes, in a philosophy that I share, which is to collaborate, that you bring stakeholders together to work toward solutions. And I think the NAIC has provided, through the leadership, has provided one of those forums. There are certainly others, and Diven has been going for several years. I think has provided a really critical forum for these discussions. So we have an opportunity like we've not experienced in my lifetime to see something, and so I think each of us feel committed, and I can speak for the other regulators as we've shared thoughts and concerns with each other about how we'll make changes. We share that commitment, and it's something I think Andy and I have discussed that we both look forward to working on.
So just on that note, and I know we're giving closing thoughts, but there is a question that came up about whether either DOI, Connecticut or Massachusetts, has a diversity data call. So is that a thing? The reference here is that California has those calls, and a diversity councils. I think Commissioner Mace, you referenced kind of your D&I lead within your department, but any data calls?
We do not have that yet. As a matter of fact, that's part of what we're discussing. Earlier this week what exactly we can do, because we do know, there is a legacy and we need to move forward, and we are looking at what we need to do to move forward. And I'd be particularly interested in seeing not just numbers, but where people are, because you can always you can recruit people, but unless they feel safe and valued, you can't retain them. So that's one of those things that we're going to be looking at. That could be, as Gary mentioned, that could be an expansion of what we look at when we look at corporate governance. As part of the whole idea behind corporate governance is if you look at the people who run the company, we've got a pretty good idea what the company is going to do. And this is, another track that I think we need to add to that. And if I can just throw in one more thing, by the way, the 60, because I see somebody had asked about the $16 trillion
Yeah.
Statistic. Citigroup issued a study, so it should be on their website. Bloomberg and NPR have also had it that I've seen. Yeah, this was just within the last day or two.
That's the reference to the 16,000, Madeline. So you want to go to Citigroup, right? It looks like someone is posting the link, so we'll try to make that available. But Commissioner Mance, it looks like there's one more question for you. Out of curiosity, Allison wants to know how many new licenses came from the new translation of the exam?
Unfortunately, can't give you that. Yeah, can't give you that right now.
Okay.
Part of that is the whole COVID issue, because things have changed since the exam went in late last year. By the time we got everything done, then we had to deal with COVID and suspended exams for a while. So I don't have a raw number for you right now. What I do know is, what I can tell you, and this is moving forward, is that we are working on something that we had planned to do before COVID. We're also using media. We've got a media campaign that will start some point soon, I hope, depending on how things go with this virus, that will make sure that we'll spread the word through Spanish language media. So I just don't have those numbers yet. We'll see, what COVID's done to everything. It's not business as usual, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Fully understand that. So Nancy, I'm just going to turn it to you for your final words, and then I'll have a couple of words myself. So
thank you. I'm going to repeat what I said when I started, which is touch the untouchable topics, right? And so we all finally have gotten comfortable talking about gender diversity within organizations. That feels okay. Well, things that don't feel okay are the things that we actually need to talk about if we're going to actually have change. So every successful organization has a strong culture, and that culture that you have has to be one where for the business reason, because we truly know and believe that a diverse culture within an organization gives successful results, that diversity of thought. So if you stop at only trying to tackle gender and you don't tackle things such as sexuality and racial equality, if you don't put disabilities at the table, it's going to take us forever to change. So you might as well put everything on the table now if you're really going to challenge yourself to be an inclusive company. And the most inclusive companies will be, it is proven, the most inclusive companies will be the most successful. And so if that is your strategic plan for your organization, is that your success path, that will actually, it won't be a question about if we make change. It is, we will. And how fast can we change? How fast can we be the change agent? Tim, thank you.
So, and then that leads to my final comments, and I think that is exactly right. I mean, you expedite the speed, or the movement is moved at a faster rate. If the one word I think that was referenced earlier that resonates with me is around collaboration. I think as an industry historically, we do not collaborate enough. And so that is the call to action that I have for our industry, is to collaborate. I mean, in order to make this movement, not a moment, but a movement, long-term have some sticking power to it, we all have to be vested in it, and we all have to move it forward. So continue to enjoy the rest of the events of Dive In. We thank you for your participation on this particular webinar and presentation. I thank my panelists, Commissioner Mays, Commissioner Anderson, and Nancy. Thank you for joining me today, and we are going to turn it over to our Dive In partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ngazi.
Thank you, Ngazi, and thank you, Commissioner Anderson and Commissioner Mays and Nancy, for joining us today. I can see that a lot of lively discussion and chat in our Q&A today, so I want to thank our audience attendees for joining us as well and really contributing a lot of good thought and commentary to this very important conversation. As Ngazi just said, we hope is a movement, not a moment, and we will continue to do this work through Dive In and through all of our other affiliations going forward, our companies. In closing, the host team here in the Hartford area wanted the opportunity to use our collective good locally. And last year with our inaugural event in Hartford, we had the opportunity to combine our resources for financial donation and investment to Dress for Success, an organization I'm sure many of you are aware of and the good work that they do around the country. And so this year, we are very proud to announce an opportunity to support junior achievement of Southwest New England. So this is really looking at, not just kind of making donation, but how can we make it strategic? And we're just informed that timing was great for our question and for our Dive in 2020 because in October of this year, the National African American Insurance Association was already underway in conversations with junior achievement on a national level across 18 cities where NIA has chapter members, about 600 members, to partner on a day where our goal would be to increase those volunteers of a diverse background, but also directly from our industry. The stats of junior achievement show that nearly or just over half of the student alumni report, 20% of the student alumni report going into the industry, the same industry as the adult volunteer that they worked with as a part of the financial literacy and education that JA provided them. So imagine the impact of a volunteer coming from a diverse background, looking like the some 50% of the minority students that are in the program. Also being able to share with them a little bit about our industry, the insurance industry coming from across our country. So we're really excited to strategically partner and make that donation to JA and support the strategic partnership between JA and NIA nationally. So more information to come, I'm sure, from both organizations as they announce their formal JA Day in October of this year, so just next month. But our local team is really pleased to support that. So with that, I believe we are closing things out. So I will thank you all again on behalf, again, of Dive in 2020 and our global and local company sponsors, city chairperson, and our planning team for joining us today. And please continue to carry this conversation forward into your organization to see how we can really make change and impact around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you very much.